詳しいことは知らないが、月の精のような美女で、彼女が踊れば祝福するように光が舞い。
The Apothecary Diaries is known for having mesmerizing animation and art that elevates the unique energy and quirky tone the series brings. Over the course of its many episodes, a wide variety of directors have taken on the responsibility of taking on the privilege one episode at a time. Within this sea of talent, there was one who put together an episode that looked unlike any other. And of course, I could only be talking about the iconic episode 4. Just kidding. This wasn't exactly the craziest episode, but that just goes to show how unique the animation turned out to be, that it was enough to catch my critical eye. So without further ado, let's get into an episode with the likes of which we may never see again in this long-running series. Making motion lifelike. Funny enough, as we go deep into this Japanese anime, the director in question for today is called China. Now, this isn't just any old episode director. For Apothecary Diaries, while there are a lot of talented directors in the mix, a vast majority of them do not do their own storyboard. In fact, this is usually handled or at least assisted by the season's lead director Norihiro and Akinori. But for episode 4, China not only directed the episode but was also the lone person who storyboarded it. I like this a lot for a couple of reasons as an artist myself. For one, this means that despite being an adaptation, this episode is theirs alone visually. Sure, the content of the scene itself is faithful to the source as it should be, but when it comes to visual look, the episode does not follow anyone else's lead but China's. For lack of a better term, this episode was China's kingdom, and we got a front row seat to witness their art. So what exactly makes this art stand above the rest? Well, the answer lies in realism. Unfortunately, I don't mean this in the sense that maomao is real. She is sadly not. But what I think China does best in this episode is provide a much more realistic look to the characters we all know and love. Look no further than the very faces of the characters. Even to the untrained eye, you're sure to notice something is amiss. Despite how recognizable the characters are, they just seem less sharp, more round. Understandably, for those who aren't rewatching, this detail may even end up slipping under your nose. After all, this is only 4 episodes deep in the very first season. In fact, for me, it was at the tail end of the episode that I finally realized in my first watch that I was witnessing something that looked very different. When maomao gets closer to get Liwa in on some booby tech, you get a full view of both the motion and the proportion that China wishes to portray. It's in that smooth lean over that highlights the fuller face and thicker neck of both these lovely characters. Quite frankly, there is a sort of uncanniness to how realistic this scene looks. Of course, this is just one example.
かつて遊郭の姉ちゃんたちが教えてくれた秘術である。マオマオも覚えておいて損はないわよ。
Going through the episode again, it's easy to see just how much China values accuracy in every bit of movement. One could almost think the animation was CGI instead of hand-drawn. Sadly, I lack any evidence to definitively confirm the technique myself, but it is nonetheless an impressive feat. So you can see now why I value this scene so highly. On top of visual glamour, China chooses to portray maomao's lean-over as quite an intimate and serious thing. In comparison, let's take a look at a moment that is not unlike what we've been talking about. Now, as you could probably tell, there isn't much wrong with this image we're looking at, but it is noticeably different. I think it comes down to intent from what we got from China, and China is intent on showing us a more realistic look. Not to get too deep into art terminology, but the vibe you get from China's visual identity is like realism from a painting. maomao is almost reaching towards Liwa with everything her neck allows, invoking the idea that she's telling her something not only private, but intimate. To put it frankly, you could poster up a still frame of this scene for decoration in your otaku room. I won't judge. Meanwhile, the similar scene from season 2 kinda just does what has to be done. Simple posing, little frames, it treats the scene as a simple way to get from point A to point B in terms of information. Of course, it's important to keep in mind that there's nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, we are just watching an anime. I think part of why this whole episode just works though is the fact that it's the right time time for someone of China's visual sense to take the helm. Not just for the visual look, but for channeling the emotions and vibe needed for the episode. The highlight being Maomao's confrontation with Liwa's maids. It's explosive, it's angry, it thrives with fluid animation and a realistic look on Maomao's terrifying look. It all goes back to serving the narrative and amplifying the emotions of a scene.
お慕いするリファ様と同じだ。血の気の失せた肌と落ちくぼんだ眼下と食事も取れないような体。
And it may only be the start of the series, but even going back one episode before, you can see how Apothecary Diaries was already leaning to a particular comedic style for less serious moments. Which brings me to comedy. China does a very interesting thing when it comes to comedy in this episode, which is quite different from every other episode in the series. Staying true to this style, China strays away from the visual deformation seen from other episodes and tones down the reactions from characters to a more mellow visual. Now, not to say people bounce when thrown in real life, but it isn't the same comic style that veteran Apothecary fans would be used to. Even Maomao's disgust towards Jinshi is brought down to the ground. Though of course the feeling of repulse still shines bright and loud even so, and that's the point. China is not changing the essence of the series, they're simply showing it through their own unique creative lens. Even if their lens is a little bit short on some meow action. With that being said, this being a big series, China knows enough to not stray too far away from the visual tree. They still give way for the usual comedic moments such as using a simplified background and emote, something that's been made a staple throughout the series. But this small moment is just an echo of the episode at large. Consistently, China chooses to show as much as he can of the setting in wide angles, and as you would expect, that does come with some unavoidable drawbacks. When it comes to giving a super thanks for this video though, there are no drawbacks. But also remember to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more awesome content like this one. And make sure to join the comments below to share what you thought of China's amazing animation. The episode The World Stood Still.
これはダメ。こっちもダメで、あとこれとそれとこっちと。
Understandably, with great motion comes a great budget, and despite how high production Apothecary Diaries already is, it was simply not enough to completely fulfill all the nooks and crannies China would have liked to fill. The result? A certain number of scenes are simply still images. Now, hold your horses, this is still far from the legendary animation that is the beginning after the end. That being said, in an episode filled with buttery smooth animation, the scenes of stillness do stick out just that little bit more. But as we dabbled on before, even those moments are not without beauty. China's storyboarding doesn't disappoint, as even the most motionless frame is akin to tasteful paintings. Composition, angle, there's a lot to love in each and every frame. Most importantly, these aren't just any shots that China simply pulled the plug on in animating. The shots that did end up frozen in time are actually ones that are grand and really show off the setting. To a degree, these scenes actually remind me of everyone's favorite studio, Studio Ghibli.
呆れた。これ全部食べ物屋よ。誰もいないね。
When you have that in mind, the scenes that are in motion become even easier to appreciate. May it be blowing some hot air or other similar everyday actions, China breathes life into the moments that show life. So while it is quite unfortunate that not every single frame lives up to the same degree of motion, the world is no less alive for it. The opening to a new horizon. Looking outside the Apothecary Diaries for a second, I think a great example of China's work that rounds off everything we've talked about is episode 2 of the 3rd season of Encouragement of Climb.
途中までは同じなんだけど、この輪っかをね、もう一度穴に通すの。
It just looks a bit stiffer compared to even the next episode. While not bad, there are some shortcuts taken in showing characters in motion, where China always tries to show the entire movement, even if it does come at the cost of adding a still frame here and there. The most meaningful difference, however, is China's focus on using animation to enhance the narrative. The story of episode 2 for this hiking anime involves the girl shopping for shoes. And what keeps dominating these scenes of hiking? The shoes. Now you could say that's the reason why things are a bit more lax in the next episode, no longer needing to call back to the plot point, but to that I say, what if the shoes were on the other foot? So for those who were touched by the same vision of anime that China presented, where to next? Well, China doesn't actually have all that many episodes directed and storyboarded under their belt, at least nothing else to the same magnitude as the Apothecary Diaries, but when they do get called on for the job, you can be sure it stands out from the rest. I can only think it's unfortunate that they aren't one of the few directors who've had a second crack at an episode for Apothecary Diaries, given his great track record. Not to say, of course, that Apothecary Diaries has been lacking in the animation department. At times I could even say things get majestic, but if you really insisted, I can think of one particular episode. I suppose the lesson is you can never want for too much in terms of direction. Speaking of, China did actually handle the second opening for the anime's second season. Makes sense now why I liked it so much. What with the ambitious POV shots and fluid motion, I'd even say it has echoes of Shingo Yamashita's amazing openings of Ranking of Kings and Jujutsu Kaisen fame.
嘘じゃねえだろうな。本当にこいつに当てるだけでいいのか？
Nonetheless, I'm sure China can find their place in many more anime moving forward, considering the talent they've shown in the anime episodes they've handled so far. So, how about you? Did you notice the animation difference in episode 4 the first time you saw it? What episode of Apothecary Diaries do you wish China had directed? Are there any more talented anime directors you wish would get a shot at handling an episode of this beloved series? We can't wait to hear it. And as always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below what you thought of today's video. Thanks for watching.